hit this recording and let's start. Great. Thank you for joining, everybody. My name is Mario Sanchez, and as I mentioned, I run training here at Sumo Logic. And today I'm going to walk you through how to bring your graphite-compatible metrics into Sumo Logic. Let me start with a little bit of housekeeping items just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the first thing you notice is that you're all on mute, and this is just so that we can avoid distractions. Otherwise, we have a lot of conversations happening. But if you have a question, you have a GoToWebinar panel on your right-hand side. Feel free to send your questions. I'll try to go through questions as you're sending them, but if not, rest assured we have a Q&A session at the end, and we'll be able to manage all questions then. The question that I get the most is, can we have the slides? And the answer is yes. We will record this session, and you will get access to both the slides and the recording of this in case you want to share it with other peers in your organization. All right, so let's get started. Essentially, at the completion of this webinar, let me actually preface, most of you are very familiar with logs. You know how to collect them, you know how to analyze them. Therefore, today I'm going to focus on the metrics portion of it. Specifically, I'm going to focus on the graphite-compatible metrics. So at the completion of this webinar, you'll know how to ingest graphite-compatible metrics. You'll be able to analyze and chart your metrics to get real-time analysis. More importantly, I'm going to walk you through and show you how you can correlate your graphite metrics and your logs so you can troubleshoot your issues faster. And last but not least, we are launching a beta program for one of the features called Metrics Rules, and I'm going to talk a lot more about it, but you'll see in a little bit. You'll be able to join this beta program if you wish to do so. All right, so let me start with a 30,000-foot view. What are metrics? What are Sumo Logic metrics? Well, in short, metrics are numeric samples of data that we can collect over time, and they help us measure infrastructure, things like our operating system performance or application performance. Perhaps we want to keep an eye on our disk activity and our network activity. In short, metrics are effective. It's an effective tool to monitor and troubleshoot, so you can identify your root cause and get down to the root of your problems a little quicker. Here are a few examples of how you can use your metrics. You can use them to gain your visibility into your app performance. You can start tracking your KPIs over time. Two of my favorite ones are down here. You can use metrics to determine if an outage has occurred and how to restore service. But I like this one down at the bottom. You can use metrics to determine why an event has occurred, and more importantly, how to prevent it in the future. So I think most of you here probably are already using graphite metrics, so I won't convince you about metrics themselves and the value of them, but let's talk a little bit about how to get them into Sumo. Let me take a step back, and from a metrics perspective, Sumo Logic can ingest metrics in from three main sources. The first one on the left-hand side is host metrics. So we can bring host metrics from any of your host servers, regardless of the operating system. This gives you insight into your CPU, your memory, your network, or say, for example, your disk usage. For your AWS metrics here in the middle, we collect these via CloudWatch. These give you insights into your AWS environment. So examples of that could be your ELB metrics, your RDS metrics, your ECS metrics. For each of these, you can watch the webinar on how to set up each one of those. But today, we're going to focus on these graphite-compatible metrics that are here on the right-hand side. But before I go any further on how to set it up, I'd like to walk you through a user demo of how to use both logs and metrics. So we call this a unified logs and metrics solution. So this one in particular is going to be a troubleshooting demo. What I'm going to be showing you here is first, I'll show you how you can use Sumo's alerting capabilities to notify a user of a critical event. This alert is going to direct us to a dashboard where metrics can help us identify the what is going on in our environment. And then we're going to pivot and correlate it or dive into the relevant logs to identify why this is happening. So you notice how we're using metrics to identify what is going on, and then we're going to dive into the relevant logs to identify why this is happening. So let's jump right into it. Let me switch over to this instance here. And what I'm going to be using as an example is this website called Travel Logic. This is just like any modern app out there. This is using microservices, so it's got containers, all the good stuff. So this could be very similar to, say, your environment. And say that I'm looking to travel from San Francisco to where do I want to go today? Let's go to Barcelona. Why not? So as you can imagine, you can run through this stuff, choose your flights, say purchase. I have purposely inserted some errors into this particular environment so that at checkout I actually have some errors happening in here. So let's say that I want to book this flight, and I give you my credit card number. I mean, don't be copying my number. I don't want you to be using my credit card here. But when you try to pay, because I have purposely inserted some errors, you'll notice I'm getting some internal server errors that are happening. All right, if Travelogic is using Sumo Logic as a solution, a couple of things would have already happened. The first one is, most likely than not, if I set this correctly, I would be getting some sort of alert. So you notice here in my Slack channel, I have a Slack channel called my Travel app, and I'm already getting some alerts saying, oh, it looks like you're having some spikes, some outliers that are going on. I can click here to view some results, or I could even click on this particular link that is giving me a dashboard with a little bit more information. That link happens to be pointing to, let me exit out of this for now. That happens to be pointing to this particular dashboard, which let me refresh right now since I've inserted a couple of errors in there. And you noticed right off the bat that there's a lot of green, I'm sorry, there's a lot of reds going on. Before I had it green, but now that I've inserted some errors, I can see some stuff happening with my ELB response times. Notice this one here is showing me that I'm having some 500s. This one in particular is showing me my checkout service. So you notice how I'm using this operational overview dashboard to give me a high-level view of all the different things that are going on. The one on the top left-hand side is showing me my reporting nodes. I can see my database issues in here. I can see some product services. But in particular, you notice that my checkout services, it has a very high number of errors. Something seems to be going on with my checkout, which we experience. As soon as I tried doing my checkout here and paying, I got an error saying that something was going on. All right, so as the oh, sorry, this is where I wanted to go. So from an operations perspective, I can either have this dashboard in my operations center and I can start seeing a lot of reds, or I could be alerted via Slack or any other tool that you might want to create a webhook to. It could be simple as email, but I'm being alerted of some situation going on. So coming into here, what I want to do is I want to start diving a little deeper. I want to find out why I'm getting so many errors. So I'm going to click on this checkout service panel here, and it's taking me to another dashboard that is going to give me a little bit more insight into what is happening. And this is great. This is a dashboard showing me a little bit of the service details. So let's start with the top left-hand side here. In terms of bookings, I see that everything was great. These are success counts. The green area is showing me all the success bookings that I've had up to about, let's say, 15 minutes ago. Actually, right before I started this webinar, I inserted some errors. And you notice how things were going really well with the successes, but all of a sudden I started having a spike in my failures as well. So something is going on in terms of bookings. You notice how I'm using metrics to identify the what is going on. Clearly, I'm having some issues with bookings. It looks like around that same time, I started having a spike in my CPU and total memory. You notice how things were looking fairly decent, and all of a sudden I have some spikes. And if you look at that pop-up where it says 119, I can see that the metric is the CPU, my average CPU, but in particular, I have a node called the travel checkout, which is having this big spike. Just for completeness, let me show you a little bit of these other dashboards in here. This one's showing my gateway latency. And again, around 10 a.m., it's starting to show that there's a bit of outliers in terms of my gateway latency. And down here at the bottom, I see some error nodes or errors by node, and it's already highlighting which nodes are having a little bit of issue. So I could dive into any of these dashboards or any of these panels and start identifying a little bit more of what issue is happening with my environment. Let me dive into this one here, CPU and total memory. It looks like now I know that my bookings are having issues, right? If I look at my left-hand side, I can clearly see that I'm having some issues with my booking. Why am I having those issues? I want to dive a little bit deeper and start correlating why is it causing these booking issues. Well, on my right-hand side, around the same time, I'm seeing that I had some spike in my CPU. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into that particular panel and start identifying a little more of what is going on. You notice here, this particular line here, this particular query is looking for the CPU total, which is the one that seemed to spike. I'm also looking for memory usage, but memory doesn't seem to be presenting much of an issue, so I'm going to turn that one off just by clicking on it. And now you notice that I'm focusing specifically on the memory usage piece here, and I can start identifying that it seems to be in my travel checkout node, on two of my travel checkout nodes in particular, versus these other ones here that are travel products or travel worker nodes that are not having those issues. Let me take a step back from the demo here for just a second. For those of you, since this is specifically to Graphite, for those of you who know Graphite fairly well, you probably have noticed that this does not look like a Graphite metric. It's talking about namespace, it's talking about metrics, and you might be wondering why is this looking so different? Oh, by the way, someone in the question said memory usage, and you're right, I meant CPU usage. So thank you for the correction. I meant that the CPU usage spiked up. Okay, so going back to what I was mentioning, you notice that this does not look like like a Graphite metric. Well, let me show you. I'm gonna switch to this tab here for just a second to show you the example. The reason that we can do this is because we're converting those Graphite the Graphite naming convention or the Graphite metrics into something a little more readable. In this case, we're using name value pairs. But let me show you, like here, I'm pulling a metric called metric success count, and I'm pulling this metric specifically only for bookings and only for the namespace CS team or customer success team. There's various teams in this organization. But what I want to show you is that you can actually pull the same stuff. Let's say that I want to pull that same metric, and I'm going to start pulling by, or actually, let's say that I did not know my naming convention of my metrics. So what I want to do is I want to find the metric success count for that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to enter success, and notice how it starts pulling all the different metrics for success or success count or success max or whatever different pieces I want. And in particular, here's the customer success one that I want, and I want booking. So I can just grab that metric, and there you go. Here is the exact same. I'm going to turn that one on. You see how you can turn it on and off? And you can see that it's the exact identical one as this one in here. So what I just showed you is that I can turn a metric whose name is something like this, travel.customer success team or customer support team, .counters.travel.checkout, so on and so on, .success.count. I can do some sort of parsing, or I can create what we call actually metric rules, which we're going to talk a lot more about later on. But I can take a metric name like this and convert it into name value pair, which is what I'm using in here. The really cool thing about this is that this little tool, I'm going to delete this for just a second. This little tool that does the pop-up here actually understands Graphite naming conventions. So it will complete things for me. You notice that I could do CS stream, and perhaps I want all of them here, and perhaps I want all of them here, but then I just want to focus on bookings, and from this I just want success, and I just want count. So I built the exact same string here by using this autocomplete because it understands Graphite. Okay, let's leave that here for now. I'll talk a lot more about parsing the name and metric rules later on, but I just wanted you to understand that the reason why you see these simple name value pairs is because we can convert these graphite names into something a little more meaningful that it's easy for even a non-graphite user to be able to tackle. All right, let's go back to our demo. So I was talking a little bit about my CPU usage having spiked here, and you notice that this happens to be for the travel checkout node. Tell you what I'm going to do. Since this happens to be for the travel checkout node, I want to find out what's happening in my logs in terms of these travel checkout nodes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to enter down here at the bottom. I have the ability to enter a log query. For those of you who know logs very well, you remember that we start with some sort of metadata tag. So I'm going to say, I'm going to look for source category equals travel. Oops, if I could spell it, for travel. And in particular, I believe it's travel checkout notes. I think I'm sorry. It actually is customer support, travel checkout. There we go. So I'm going to look for those log files, but I probably care for the log files that have the word error in it or exceptions. And voila, look at this. What it just did is it graphed my metrics. So here's my metrics graph showing me that spike. And here are my logs, or an overlay of my logs. The darkness of each one of these cubes represents how often the word error appears. So the fact that it's not showing here in any of these other ones means that I did not have any errors in those logs. But as soon as we see that spike, I'm also seeing a lot of errors in my error logs. So I could do a couple of things from here. For one is, I know that there are some errors in my logs, and that's going to help me identify this. So I can click on any of these boxes, and it's going to show me the errors down here. So now look at this. I have the ability to look at my metrics and to look at my logs at the same time. But this would still require me to kind of rake through these logs and try to identify what is really going on. What I could do now is I could take the power of logs that you guys are accustomed to. If I do a shift click, let me do exactly that. If I do a shift click, what it's going to do is it's going to take that same query and it's going to take me to the logs world so that I can start looking at what is going on. Let's say that I want to look for the last, why not 30 minutes, since I know that I inserted my errors not that long ago. So now I'm looking at last 30 minutes of errors in Sumo. Let me make it even broader. Why don't I just say, tell you what, show me everything that happened in the last 30 minutes, not just the errors, because a lot of times the culprit probably does not have the word error in it, right? So I'm going to look at everything that happened in the last 30 minutes, but that's about, let's see, that's about 36,000 messages. So it'd be pretty hard for me to rake through 36,000 messages, which is everything that happened in the last 30 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this log reduce button. And while log reduce is running, let me tell you what this is doing. It's actually raking through my 36,000 messages, and it's identifying signatures, or it's identifying which messages are so similar one to the other that it can start grouping them. And when it completes, it does exactly that. It comes back and says, hey, look, Mario, there are about 4,000 messages that all have this same syntax. Of course, the date is going to be different. They are timestamps, and perhaps the IP address is where it's coming from, or the gateway where it's coming from is going to be different. But for the most part, this signature looks very similar one to the other. So it took those same 36,000 messages, or 35,000 since time is relative, and it brought it down to only 3 pages instead of hundreds of pages that I had before. Not only that, but what it did is it gave me some sort of relevance, and it says, okay, out of all those messages that you had out there, it looks like about 2,000 of those messages had an error on something to do with, let's see, with gate server certificate. So there was an issue with not being able to verify the certificate. Then it told me that I had another error that was doing some sort of access denied issue. So notice here I'm getting some issues with access. And if I scroll a little bit further, I see another one here. And this one in particular is important. If you look at this one is saying that I did a deployment And on that particular deployment, it was for the service checkout, and I put version 1.14.dev. So what this tells me is that someone in my organization deployed development code into my production environment, which led into a bad certificate, which is leading into access denied, and that is most likely the culprit for all my issues if I go back to my metrics world. That is probably what is causing these errors that I'm seeing here is probably what is causing a high CPU load in my travel checkout, which if I backtrack all the way to these dashboards, it was probably causing the failures in my bookings. So with that little story, what I want to show you is that we went from being alerted or being notified that something is going on, whether I have this dashboard showing on my operations center or whether I got an alert to let me know that something is happening. I went into my metrics world to start identifying what is going on. The metrics told me, oh, listen, there's some bookings that are not doing all that great. And by the way, there's a high CPU load in your environment. So my metrics were able to identify the what was going on. But the key thing here was that I was able to dive into the relevant logs and start identifying really what is going on, what is driving, or why am I having these metrics spike in such a high number. All right, so hopefully this paints the picture of how you can start using your metrics and your logs in a unified way so that it helps you troubleshoot much quicker. Let's talk a little bit about the graphite compatible metrics in particular. So getting data from, say, your stats D, your collect D, or the likes. Let me begin with your current state. So this diagram here can represent obviously a very simplified view of your current state. But let's say on the left-hand side you have a server, a device, a container, and what you're looking to do is to get the metrics from your operating system, get your metrics from get your container metrics, or even your custom application code metrics into an analytics tool so you can start getting visibility into your environment. On the right-hand side, you have a Graphite server collecting your metrics, which could be sending to a Grafana or a similar tool for analysis. Notice in the case of StatsD that it requires a StatsD server, which acts a bit of like a metrics aggregation daemon before sending the data over to Graphite. So your current state could be looking something like this. Now, here's how the landscape would look if you start sending, once you start sending Graphite compatible metrics into Sumo. Collect D, Drop Wizard, metrics libraries here. These can all be sending data straight to an installed collector. So this is a Sumo Logic collector that can forward that data over to Sumo Logic. It could do it through TCP or UDP over to Sumo Logic. Here's the really cool thing. This collector here can be doing double duty. It can also be ingesting your host metrics that are coming directly from your host server. So send everything to that collector and over to Sumo Logic. In the case of StatsD, you can send it to the StatsD server, which then can send it on to the Sumo Logic collector. All right, so let me show you how to do this in Sumo Logic. But basically, we have a setup wizard that walks you through this. It's pretty straightforward. These here are screens of what you will be seeing for each one of those. And as you can see from the screenshots, the setup is very simple. You specify a source category, then you select which protocol you're going to be using, whether UDP or TCP. You select the port. The default is 2003. What is different between these ones is how you allow permission for Sumo to collect the metrics. So in the case of, let's say in the case of collect D, you would edit the collect D conf file to enable there's a wired graphite plugin that you need to enable in order for us to be able to collect those logs. In the case of StatsD, you edit the config.js basically to add a graphite backend that will send data to the Sumo Logic installed collector. And in the case of Drop Wizard, you just set up some parameters to the graphite reporter object so that it can send those metrics into Sumo. And we give you the details here, which you can literally copy and paste into your environment. But let me just quickly show you so that you can see how this is done. So for those of you who have played in the collectors world, you are probably already familiar with the setup wizard. This is how we set up both logs and metrics. So if I'm just uploading a file, it's pretty straightforward. I can say, yep, upload a file, and then it says, okay, tell me where the file is, and I'll upload it for you. But today we want to do something a little more interesting. Let me go back, and let's say that we want to set up streaming. So again, this is how you set up, say, your AWS CloudTrail logs, your Amazon CloudFront logs, your Cisco logs, or any other types of logs that you want to send. You can do them here. But also within the logs are the metrics. So here's how you set up your host metrics. Here's how you get data from CollectD, from DropWizard. Here's how you get data from StatsD. So let's begin with, let's say, CollectD. Why not? I'm going to click on CollectD. Let's say that I already had a collector for simplicity, and I'm just going to choose my my collector and say, okay, I've got an installed collector, and I want to set up some CollectD source so I can start sending the data. So I specify the collector. Notice it's connecting to that collector, and it comes back and says, okay, what do you want your source category to be set to? I could set it to something as simple as CollectD. What protocol do you want to be using? We recommend TCP. Our documentation actually is pretty particular on why we recommend TCP, so I won't go through all those details. But what port do you want to use? This is a default port. And then what I was talking about before, CollectD uses a Write Graphite plugin. So here is the configuration that you would need to add to that collectd.conf in order to enable that plugin. And then once you hit continue, you would essentially create a metric source for CollectD. I'll just go through one more just to show you. Let's say that you want to send StatsD. It's incredibly similar to it. You would specify your collector, and then you would get a screen very similar to the previous one, where you're asked for a source category name, you're asked for a port, you're asked for a protocol, and in the case of StatsD, you have to edit the local config.js file so that Graphite can create a backend to send the data to you. I'm going to show you one last one, because what if you're trying to get data out of, say, JMX stats, which we don't necessarily have a little tile here for? That's okay. You can go to all sources, you can go to Graphite formatted metrics, and you see that the process is very similar to do that kind of stuff. Okay, great. I haven't seen any questions, so I'm going to continue with this. But now you've seen how pretty straightforward it is to get those metrics into Sumo. Okay, so let me switch back here for just a second. Let's talk a little bit about parsing. So you saw how, actually, let's talk a little bit about both, about how to create your queries, but also about parsing. So the query itself, the anatomy of a Graphite query is pretty straightforward. There's the what. So what are you looking for? In this case, I'm looking for a metric called CPU system, and then any kind of operation that you want to do on the data itself. So you notice in this particular case, I pulled the actual Graphite name, Graphite metric name by specifying it all, and then I'm doing an average, in this case averaged by _6. This one here is an interesting example, because it leads me to the next point. For those of you who are familiar with Graphite, you're well aware that it allows you to reference the metadata fields by position. In this case, it's using an _6. I think I have a little graphic here to show you. And this _6 is basically referring to the field in the 6th position. So we've replicated this same exact functionality in Sumo Logic by default. You can do exactly that, but we have actually taken it a step further. So let me show you what we've done. But before I do that, let me actually take a step back just to make sure that those who are not fully familiar with Graphite can also follow along. Graphite sends this simple format. Basically, it sends us a metric or a metric path. It sends us a metric value and a metric timestamp, and that's how we gather that data. That's how a Graphite server gathers the data. It can take a metric and the value itself and a timestamp for it. Now, the metric path itself has this unofficial yet widely adopted naming scheme. So for the metric path, the naming scheme tends to be A.B.C.D.metric, where A, B, C, and D are all metadata. That's how we were able to reference that sixth position. If this has, or the third position, in that case, it would be the C. The second position would be a B, right? So understanding that we can have this uh, tag eventually metric naming convention allows us to write things like prod.cq.cqsplitter1.latency, which in this case is my environment, it's my cluster, it's my node, and it's my metric. So that leads me to the next one. We actually have in Sumo one operator called parse, and parse allows us to do, as a matter of fact, let me just show you how to do that. I'm going to go here into the UI. I have a metric here called collect. Uh, I'm pulling the CPU system metric from my collect metric, and actually I've already done it, so I'm going to save myself a few minutes here typing this out. But if you look at this one, I'm going to turn this one off here for a second. These two queries, oops, I turned both off, but these two queries do exactly the same. What they're doing in this case, let's look at the top one first. The top one is actually saying, I'm going to get this metric, and I am going to average it by position number 6. And in this case, position number 6 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it would be this value in here. So I'm just averaging by that value. What I'm doing here at the bottom, let me turn this one off for just a second. What I'm doing here at the bottom is I'm taking the exact same metric, but then I'm using this field called, this operator called parse, and I'm parsing that same text, and I'm saying, by the way, this field, actually, I'm sorry, anything that I have a star for, I am going to parse it out. So that's my host. This guy here is my node, and this last one here is my container. So now what I could do is I could say average by container. This query, averaging by container, it's a lot more meaningful than just averaging by _6, especially for those people who did not build this query, or even for those who might not understand Graphite, right? So if you understand Graphite, averaging by _6 makes complete sense. If you do not necessarily understand Graphite, averaging by container makes a lot more sense. All right, so all this that I'm saying is because we can make it a lot easier with this parsing. Now the question would be, well, this is great, Mario, but I don't want to have to be parsing every single time I'm creating data, especially if I'm just going to be averaging by something that I already know and whatnot. So point well taken. That's actually very true. And so what I want to do is I want to introduce what we call metric rules. So this is a feature that is in beta. And I'll give you in a second the email in case you want to join the beta program. But in short, what the metric rules allow you to do is create a permanent parse statement, if you will. So one of the benefits of it is that the metric structure that you had in your Graphite, in your stats.d or in your collects.d, you can continue using that existing metric structure, because what you're going to do is you're going to create a metric rule that allows you to parse these values. So let me go back to the UI and show you exactly how that's done. I can go here to manage, go to metric rules, and let's just look at this one in here. Why not? Let's go and edit it. Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm creating a permanent parse statement. I'm creating a rule that is going to parse always for me. And in this particular case, I'm saying, okay, if you ever find a metric name that matches this same string in here, so you notice it should have collect D and it should have K8s stats, then I'm going to take all these values that are embedded here in the middle, shown by stars, and that first one, I'm going to make it the host. The second one is going to be my environment. The third one is going to be my node. Look, it's pretty cool, because if there's different names for a particular field, you can say that third one is going to be node, but it's also going to be called a pod, because maybe someone else calls it a pod, or some other team in your organization might refer to it as a pod. The fifth one is going to be the metric, and so on. You get the point. The good news is that all these metrics get parsed, and in real time here, it's showing me the matching of the series, of all the series that actually match that particular string in here. So this makes it incredibly easy, because now I can use, let me cancel out of this, I can use the naming convention that I was showing you before. I remember when I showed you this, I showed you namespace equals CS team, type equals bookings, metric equals success count. That is a lot easier to write than to actually spell out the entire metrics name, especially if you're not necessarily that knowledgeable in Graphite itself. All right, so uh, just to summarize, metric rules, which is a beta feature, allows you to create parsing rules that will take your existing graphite names and turn them into name value pairs that are a lot easier to look at, and also that are a lot easier to compare to your other metrics, say your host metrics or your AWS metrics, because it's going to follow the format that it has in there. If you're interested in joining the beta program, definitely reach us at rules beta group at Sumo Logic. And like I said before, I will share these slides with you. We'd love to have you be part of that beta feature, beta program, because it only helps us to create a better feature for you as well. Okay, so in summary, we've talked about how to ingest graphite compatible metrics. You've seen how to analyze and chart your metrics to get real-time analysis. But probably more interesting is you've seen how to correlate graphite metrics and logs. This helps us, or the points here, or what this helps us is, one, it helps us reduce that mean time to identification and resolution by providing contextual analysis. Secondly, it helps us improve your team's collaboration by using a single source of truth that can be securely accessed and analyzed. And the third one is a unified logs and metrics solution, as you saw me dive from metrics into logs. So this unified logs and metrics solution eliminates the need of multiple tools, which eventually will lower your total cost of ownership. Okay, with that said, let me open it up to any questions that might be on the floor. No questions? Well, while you're thinking or perhaps typing some questions, I just wanted to point out a couple of resources available to you. The first one, obviously, documentation and training. If you go to our website, you'll be able to see the different training offerings that we have. And from a documentation perspective, help at sumologic.com. We also have the library of past webinars, which this slide has links to. Secondly, we have Sumo Dojo, which is our community where you can post questions, where you can search for questions, you can respond to questions that are already out there. You can submit feature requests as well by voting for existing ones or submitting your new ones. You can open support cases, and this is all accessible from that help menu. If you go to help, you get to documentation and all those good things. Let's see. The first question is, can we access the recording of this webinar? And the answer is yes, Elliot. We will make sure that I'll send you an email with both a link to the recording as well as the slides themselves. The second question is similar. Can we get a recording? Yes. So to answer this, yes, you will get a recording for these sessions, both the slides and the recording. And the third one is, can you point me to operators examples? Okay, yes, of course. Let me just show you. So one of the questions is operator examples, and actually good for me, I had already opened that tab. If you go to help.sumologic.com, which is our documentation, and you literally just enter metrics operators, one of the options that is going to come here is metrics operators. And if you click on that, it takes you to this particular page. And this shows you the different operators available to use. So average with a brief description of how to, what it does, and then an example of how to use it. Count, delta, max, min, parse. I did not go this time through all the different operators, only because in previous webinars we've actually covered them. But yeah, feel free to peruse through this page. This will show you all the different operators that are available to you. Okay? Any other questions? No? Great. In that case, oh, wait, looks like there is another question on there. Let's see. Do we have tips for making queries run faster? So Elliot's question is, do we have tips for making queries run faster? I think, Elliot, if you come from the logs world as well, the usual suspects still apply. So let me go here to my queries itself. And if I'm in here, usually, like, are you looking for a time period that is meaningful enough? Of course, the larger the time period, the more that it's going to run. The other one that I would say is the more selectivity you add to your queries, the more it's going to the better it's going to run. So, for example, if we're looking at this particular query, remember that we were looking for the namespaces and so on. If I knew already that my issues was with travel checkout nodes, what I would really want to do is say node equals, I would say node equals and focus specifically on my travel checkout nodes. So the more that you can narrow down your queries, the more, and you can even do things like this: node equals travel checkout star, which means just the travel checkout nodes. Don't give me all other nodes as well. So the more that you can narrow down your queries, of course, the scope of the queries, the faster they're going to run as well. Okay, great. These are all great questions. Anything else? Let's see. One last, it wasn't a question, but a comment about references for metrics. So yes, there will be another webinar coming up soon. Actually, there will be a couple of webinars coming out. So one is going to talk about ULM as a whole. So today we focused on graphite metrics specifically, but there'll be another webinar coming in April that is talking about all the metrics. How do we take advantage of the various metrics and logs to get to troubleshoot faster. But also, we are having a webinar in the very near future. I believe we don't have a date for it just yet, but Hootsuite, who's one of our customers, is heavily using metrics and logs, and we'll be having a webinar with them in the near future. I'll make sure I actually email this list to get you the dates and how to register for that webinar as well. All right, I'm seeing a lot of thank yous in here. You're very welcome. If there's no other questions, we'll break for today. But thank you for your questions, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Have a great day.